story, Sega found him a great source of comedy and used him in a pivotal role. Many of the attributes that would form the Popeye character appeared in Dice Island. His irritable personality, bad temper, blunt attitude, savvy nature, notoriety for quick wit and sarcastic quips, all juxtaposed with his heart of gold and gallant nature. His superhuman strength was also explored, initially explained as attained luck from the Whipple Hand. Popeye's design was fairly simplistic, in keeping with the style of the strip at the time. However, his iconic look was almost immediately established. His ever-present tobacco pipe, bulging tattooed biceps, and instantly recognizable screwed-up face that, as described by Olive Oil, looks like a shipwreck. In fact, Popeye was allegedly based on a local from Sega's hometown named Frank Rocky Feigl, who had a similar appearance and disposition. Popeye was initially dressed in a white sailor uniform, obtaining his iconic black shirt during the story in a game of chance. Popeye was a character unlike any that had been seen in comics before, and instantly became a favourite of readers. Perhaps not realising, however, Sega removed him from the lineup in the following story as originally intended. Fan backlash immediately ensued as letters flooded in imploring Sega to bring him back. Realising that his one-and-done character had spawned an immense interest which he hadn't seen before, Sega soon brought Popeye back, giving him the starring role. By 1931, the strip was renamed Thimble Theatre Starring Popeye and refocused to follow the wacky exploits of the scrappy Sailor Man, while Ham Gravy was dropped from the strip, never to return. As a result, Popeye won over the affections of Olive Oil, and the two became coupled, even receiving a child in the mail named Sweet Pea in 1933. The newly revamped Thimble Theatre became one of the most popular strips of the 1930s, growing in syndication to over 500 newspapers, with Fortune magazine calling it their second favourite cartoon strip, behind only Little Orphan Annie. Comics historian Brian Walker credited the popularity with Sega's masterful blend of comedy, fantasy, satire and suspense, while Peanuts creator Charles M. Schulz would call Popeye a perfect comic strip, consistent in drawing and humour. Popeye's design slowly refined over time, with his face rounding and flattening out and his biceps bulging like balloons. Likewise, his character continued to grow, with iconic elements added such as his large consumptions of spinach becoming the source of his superhuman strength, though he was rarely shown eating it. Not only did Popeye have a powerful punch, he could also survive being peppered with bullets, powers he used to defeat the members of his ever-growing rogues gallery. In retrospect, Popeye is considered one of, if not the first superhero, or at least a precursor to those who followed.
He didn't even have a cape.
Jerry Siegel cited him as one of the strongest influences for he and Joe Shuster in the creation of Superman in the late 1930s. Meanwhile, in the early 30s, animated cartoons were at peak popularity and swiftly evolving. After a decade of silent shorts, sound cartoons had become the norm, and the introduction of colour was changing the game once again. Every major studio was distributing scores of cartoons every year, produced rapidly by various independent animation houses. One such was the Fleischer Studios, co-founded by brothers Max and Dave Fleischer at the dawn of popular animation in the early 1920s, helping to revolutionize the art form in its infancy. In 1930, the
That's what's been making all that noise up there.
Cartoon series, a character who soon became their most popular, spinning off into her own headline series by the end of 1932. However, in an era where Walt Disney was taking the world by storm with Technicolor silly symphonies and comedies featuring the world's most beloved cartoon character, Mickey Mouse, the immense popularity of the sultry and seductive Betty Boop was not enough for the Fleischers, who found themselves under constant pressure from their distributor, Paramount Pictures, to develop more characters and produce more cartoons. As put by animation historian Michael Barrier, the Fleischers' original characters to this point were usually dull or unsympathetic, so they had little confidence in swiftly developing an original breakthrough cartoon star of the same caliber as Mickey. Instead, taking cues from the earliest animated shorts, they looked to comic strip pages for, again in the words of Barrier, ready-made characters. As one of the most popular of the time, the Fleischers found Popeye right for the people and made an attempt to procure a deal with King Features to license Thimble Theatre characters for use in their shorts. Before agreeing on a full contract or a full series, the Fleischers were requested to create a test cartoon, and Popeye and his pals would thus debut in 1933 Betty Boop short Popeye the Sailor, which was produced in secret and animated single-handedly by Roland Crandall away from the rest of the studio. As such, the short was effectively a Popeye cartoon guised as a Betty Boop, with Popeye its true star and Boop only making a fleeting appearance, the first and only encounter the two would ever share on the screen. Likewise, most of the short's focus was put on various other Thimble Theatre characters, including Olive Oil and the villainous Bluto, who had only appeared in one comic strip to that point. The rivalry between Popeye and Bluto was put front and centre, with the two vying for the affections of Olive Oil, fighting for her in a series of challenges where each would continuously one-up the other. The short also saw Olive Oil kidnapped by Bluto and Popeye coming to her aid with the help of his trusty spinach inherited powers. The short immediately created what would become a heavily utilised formula for Popeye's shorts and turned Spinach and Bluto, who were both incredibly obscure pickings from the comics, into undeniable trademarks of the Popeye brand. The short also debuted the classic Popeye the Sailor Man song, which would become the character's standard and eventual theme tune. King Features was so impressed with the short that they signed an exclusivity contract with the Fleischers before it was even released, licensing the characters for an initial 5 years in a deal which would eventually grow to last decades. Upon release in July of 1933, the short was an enormous success, and it suggested that this was perhaps owed in large part to its billing as a Betty Boop short, draining in larger audiences and thus invoking a larger response. The Fleischers quickly went into production on their fully fledged Popeye series, with the second installment, I Am What I Am, releasing that September, a third, Blow Me Down, releasing that October, and a further 3 released by the end of the year, offering monthly installments there on out. The series and its characters became the most popular the studio had ever produced, eclipsing even Betty Boop. It didn't matter that the Fleischers threw away Sega's more complex story arcs and sprawling plotlines in favour of their formulaic gag-laden template. Popeye became more beloved than he ever was in comics. Polls taken in 1935 even show that the popularity of the character may have superseded that of Mickey Mouse for a very brief period. Popeye's fame was so influential, in fact, that over the next decade he was subject to much parody by the Schlesinger Studio and Warner Brothers Looney Tunes, and records show that Spinach sales soared in the US by over a third.
I've heard of that.
By Costello, known as Red Pepper Sam, for close to 30 shorts. However,
That's cute, though. Okay, just do
Reminds me of somebody.
Became entirely incorrigible as his severe alcoholism got in the way of his work. Lou was put in charge of finding a new voice for the character, and upon hearing in-betweener animator Jack Mercer singing the Popeye theme around the studio, hired him on the spot. 1935's King of the Mardi Gras was Mercer's first short, with his performance described by Barrier as gravelly and quirky as Costello's, but considerably warmer and more flexible, giving the character a dimension he lacked in earlier films. Due to the sound on the early Popeyes being post-synced instead of recorded prior to animation, much of their dialogue was ad-libbed. Mercer was a master improviser and provided Popeye with his trademark mumbles and grumbles so inherent to his humour and popularity. The Fleischers were no stranger to an on-the-fly style of production, and additionally saw no use in utilising pencil tests, resulting in crude, unrefined animation. Instead of trial and error experimentation, there was, in Barrier's words, a more off-the-cuff feel, working in the favour of the comic strip style. Model sheets used to keep characters visually consistent across series weren't utilised either, so Popeye's design slightly altered as different animation teams rotated from short to short. Most notably, the size and shape of Popeye's face differed between units. Some shorts saw him with a long protruding chin, while others saw him with one more bulbous. Some saw saw him with tiny round ears, others with large round ears, and others with long ovular ones. Popeye spawned during the age of rubber hose animation, aptly named for the rubbery appearance of characters, and a style that the Fleischers had used heavily for great comedic effect, almost as a trademark. Grounded in unreality, rubber hose suited Popeye perfectly, and can be attributed to making the surrealist short so popular. Animator Myron Waldman would note, it might have been just a fluke, a lucky break, that the Sega characters.
Did you know you can be shopping holiday deals right now on YouTube?
And click that little button there and
Just fit the Fleischer style so well. By 1934, however, the Disney Studios shorts were becoming more intricate and highly focused on story and character. Technically, they were also showcasing more realistic animation due to their newly developed squash and stretch style, allowing characters to appear to have real weight and mass and abide by the rules of gravity. The Fleischers realized their style of animation was growing outdated, and like many other studios at the time, conformed with this Disney style. They began devoting more effort to the shorts, employing drastic pre-planning, refining animation, and, in the words of animator Dave Tindlar, working out stories more carefully in much more detail. As a result, Popeye's design gained a consistency and shorts became more lifelike, though retained elements of rubber hose gag work so inherent to their formulation. As the Disney studio currently had exclusivity over the 3-strip Technicolor process, and the 2-strip process paled in comparison, the early shorts were produced in black and white. Popeye, in fact, did not appear in colour until 1936's Popeye the Sailor meets Sinbad the Sailor, a 2-reel short running at 16 minutes, twice the length
They
of
had color in 1936?
2 more 2-reel colour features. 1937's Popeye the Sailor meets Alibaba's 40 Thieves, and 1930's
Color me
and
surprised.
His Wonderful Land, the longest of the 3, running at 21 minutes. Centering around the tales from the 1001 Nights, these were the only colour Popeyes produced by the Fleischers, and were made solely to convince Paramount to fund a feature-length film starring the character. If the distributor agreed, it could have been the first ever feature animation. However, Paramount first wanted to see how Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, ridiculed by the press as Walt Disney's folly, fared critically and commercially.
Oh, does he has spider there? I love that.
However, Paramount first.
Yes, there's
The
a tank
longest
in
of the
there.
3, running at 21 minutes. Centering around the tales from the 1001 Nights,
This pipe
these were the
bobbing up and
only
down.
colour Popeyes produced by the Fleischers, and were
The wheel
made
of the ship.
solely to convince Paramount to fund a feature-length film starring the character. If the distributor agreed, it would have been the first ever feature animation. However, Paramount first wanted to see how Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, ridiculed by the press as Walt Disney's folly, fared critically and commercially. The specials heavily utilised the Fleischers' stereoptical process, which allowed placement of film cells in and around 3-dimensional model sets, their answer to Disney's multiplane camera. It was a highly effective technique, adding an innovative, dreamlike, fantastical feel. The shorts, marketed as 3D cartoons, were instant fan favourites and are amongst the most stunningly animated Popeyes. Impressed with them and convinced by Snow White's eventual acclaim, Paramount agreed to fund the 80-minute cartoon feature Gulliver's Travels, released in 1939. Though Popeye had initially been planned to take the lead role and was the impetus of the film in the first place, the Fleischers strangely decided against it. With the US entrance into World War II following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, the Popeye shorts were given a drastic overhaul. The character was evidently drafted into the US Navy, with his outfit changing to the standard US naval attire. Beginning with the Mighty Navy, in a sizable series of World War II
I thought all cartoons were like black and white until like the 50s.
Today, Popeye was less often seen fighting off Bluto for the affections of Olive, and instead seen using his spinach-fueled powers to fight off the Axis enemies. This change reflected the shifting attention of audiences, who had become drawn to mischievous, rebellious troublemakers. Other rebel rousers, such as Donald and Daffy Duck, both rose to fame in the era via similar war-themed shorts, while wholesome characters like Mickey Mouse were dropped from favour. Likely only for sake of variety, a small number of shorts using the original Popeye formula were produced in this period. At this same time, the Fleischers found themselves swimming in debt, which slowly broke down their professional and personal relationship, led to a studio division, and a drop in quality of their film output. Despite producing a number of series, the Popeyes remained the only ones drawing crowds and making money, so cinemas began rejecting those that didn't star him. The Fleischers had to use Popeye revenue to offset Paramount's $250,000 lost on the rejected cartoons, and additionally found themselves penalised $350,000 by the studio for going over budget on Gulliver, and a cumulative debt equivalent to almost $11 million adjusted for inflation in 2019, which they failed to pay. Despite finding great success with their 1941 Superman short, an attempt to exploit a profitable character to cover their dues, their second feature-length venture, Mr. Bug Goes to Town, released that same year, bombed at the box office and didn't even recoup its production costs, with Superman being signed an entire series projected to cost more per installment than any cartoon they've ever made, in fact 4 times more than the Popeyes. It seemed almost impossible for the Fleischers to work themselves out of the debt. This was the final straw for Paramount, who forced the Fleischers to resign from their own company and called their loan. The Fleischer studio was thrown into bankruptcy, and Paramount effective immediately took control of it, rechristened it Famous Studios, and continued the various productions. After 109 shorts, the final Fleischer-produced Popeye was released in July of 1942, with the first Famous Popeye releasing that August. It's unlikely that audiences even noticed the changeover, as the early Famous Popeyes were almost indistinguishable from the later Fleischers, continuing to utilise the World War II backdrop and story focus. In fact, the naval costume designs have become so iconic of the characters in this era, Famous Studios continued to use them well after the end of World War II in 1945. However, as Famous began to forge their own path with the series, they made a few notable shifts. 1943's Cartoons Ain't Human, Famous's 14th Popeye short, was the final produced in black and white, with the following, Her Honor the Mayor, the first produced in colour, marking a new stylistic direction for the series. Famous would notably develop their own Popeye formula, depicting a love triangle between the 3 leads. Most shorts would see Olive Oil falling for Bluto and Popeye vehemently trying to win her back, usually beating his rival to a pulp with the help of spinach. With this change, Famous also mixed up character designs. Bluto was made larger and more muscular, the prototype of a burly man, while Olive Oil was given more attractive features, such as smaller feet, lusher hair, and large round eyes, moving away from the small black dots used by the Fleischers. She essentially became more feminine and
Still
less
doesn't have any
goofy.
boobs.
However, this also resulted in a new, less attractive, superficial personality. Popeye, on the other hand, was kept much the same, however likewise gained large round eyes, and in 4 shorts was randomly seen in a blue uniform. With the extra cost and man-hours associated with the switch to colour, the studio could no longer produce monthly installments, releasing an average of 8 annually in following years. The Popeye series managed to crawl into the 1950s, but after a decade of formulaic stories rarely offering anything new, animation historian Lennon Moulton notes that they began to lack the ambition and sophistication of the earlier efforts. Additionally, they had been gradually toned down over the years, focusing less on crude, edgy humour and finding a style aimed more towards children. Overall, audiences grew tired and uninterested. In 1953, Famous produced the first and only 3D Popeye short, Popeye the Ace of Space, in an effort to win back the audience. While initially well received, other than being a fun one-off gimmick, it did little to revive the overall popularity of the series. As the 50s drew to a close, the golden age of theatrical animation was nearing its end, and television was rapidly becoming the entertainment vehicle of choice for audiences. While some of the more popular cartoon characters managed to survive theatrically into the early 1960s, others, such as Popeye, couldn't even see the decade out, with 1957 seeing the release of his final theatrical short, Spooky Swabs, the 122nd under Famous and 233rd overall. Famous continued to make theatrical cartoons of decreasing quality based around other original characters, until 1969 when Paramount closed the arm. Popeye did, however, like many of his cartoon brethren, find an afterlife on TV, becoming one of the first, alongside Bugs Bunny, to transition onto the medium with original content. Much like many other theatrical cartoon series, early Popeyes had been airing on TV since the mid-50s and managed to reinvigorate audience interest in his classic material. Considering Paramount only owned theatrical rights, King Features, who didn't earn a cent from the TV syndication, saw a great opportunity to capitalise on their IP and commissioned a brand new series, Popeye the Sailor, originally airing on ABC between 1960 and 1962. King Features utilised the limited animation style, prominent on television animation of the time, for the sake of faster, more efficient production. Limited animation made use of shortcuts such as less detailed drawings, recycled animation, held cells, and still characters.
Deported instead of imported.
Glaring errors and questionable artistic choices, the series was a ratings hit and beloved by audiences. Though modern